right. Looks like we're live. I'm just going to start with black and white, and I'm just going to throw in some silhouettes for light values here. We go to my brush size. I'm going to fit my canvas to the screen here. Go a little larger. There we go. And we'll get rid of that mask. And this background layer, we don't need that. We got a color fill there. Alright, so some silhouette shapes. I think I'm going to need a solid brush for this. Let's do one. And I think I'm going to modify this a little bit. Let's go to the brush presets here, and I will set the size. Okay, it's already set to pen pressure, but I'm going to decrease that minimum so that I can get these nice little fades here. Alright, and let's see, what else do we need? It's with texture off. Let's turn it back on, see how that... Yeah, we'll keep it on, I guess. Alright, I'll just clear all that and get right into it. Alright, so what I'm thinking here is thinking about this in a more direct kind of light pass, right? Like, where's the light hitting? And then of course black is going to be the shadows. And then we'll work it in from there. We can reverse this as well. Start painting in some black shadow shapes once we've worked some of this in. But all the same principles that we've talked about before here, just very much simplified. So the idea being, you want to carry through some of these shapes, and then you can cut them off with, actually I'll just use the eraser rather than black. So what I mean by cutting these shapes off is, like, let's say I have some kind of background layer back here. So if I go all the way through all that, through here as well, and then I erase away at some of that, like right here, then it's going to imply that this object has a shadow there that is blocking that, right? Same thing here. We'll erase these. My eraser is got a lot of play to it. So same kind of thing. Now those are starting to read as forms and not just shapes. I can zoom in so it makes a little more sense. Let's see what I'm talking about. Right here. So now this would seem to read more like a shape that's maybe something like this. Same here. Right? But we don't actually have to draw in that shadow side. We just omit it. So that's what I'm going to play with here for a little bit, and then we'll see how it develops from there. course, if you don't want to use the eraser, you can just try to keep these strokes consistent as you go through one here, pick it back up there, and there, and again there, right? The benefit of using the eraser, though, is that you get a nice sharp edge. You see how this is kind of rounded there? And if you erase it out, then you get that sharp edge, and that change in shape is going to send some information as well as far as what we're seeing, or what we're perceiving at least. You perceive that that's a shadow side of a form in the distance there. Okay. I'm tempted to put in some little wispy shapes here, you know, like, I don't know whether these are like little radio towers or, I don't know. But I don't know how quickly I want to get to that, that level of detail density. So if you picked up from the beginning, you'll have seen that I grabbed a brush and then modified it for the use that I wanted, and that's something that I would like to talk a little bit more about, and perhaps do a longer video about, you know, making your own tools, being familiar with how they work and how you can adjust them to get the most out of them. But you never need to be satisfied with, you know, just using something straight out of the box. I think you can modify things to the way that you would like to implement that tool. That being said, though, you don't need to have fancy tools. And coming from someone who, you know, sells his brush packs on ArtStation, you know, I of course recommend them if you're looking for brushes, but I will also not be shy in saying that you don't need to just pick up a tool that looks like it's going to be the answer to something. You can develop the tools in your head, right? And I think actually that is probably the correct way to look at it, that the tools that I've developed in these brushes are really just manifestations of the way that I think about working, think about painting. You know, you paint enough and you go, okay, actually, instead of trying to get all that texture by, you know, scribbling it or drawing it as if I were using a pencil, what if there's a faster way? You know, what if there's a faster way to get a smooth edge or a rough edge, or you know, something that's blocky or something that has a nice fade to it, right? Like, all of those different things are like, could be accomplished with technique, could also be accomplished with some form of automation, which is what these brushes are for. And it's universal across mediums. And what I mean by that is that there are different types of brushes and different techniques in oil painting and acrylics that follow the same kind of principles, right? Like if you wanted to do foliage, for example, you could do every little dot, but it would make more sense to use something like a fan brush, or even I've heard things like just a wad of what do you call that? paper towels, you know. So like you throw some paint down and then you kind of remove it by dabbing that on there. That gives you some randomness and texture. And anyway, point being, that's some form of automation where you're not, well, automation and hopefully some randomness too, that it's not this completely controlled, every single little thing was a brushstroke that I took. I suppose there's some value in that, but like that's its own thing, and it takes a lot of time. And so if you're interested in making some of those shortcuts, then you build tools for that, or you get tools for that. And my recommendation is that you understand the process as well as possible before getting a tool. Or if you get a tool, try to understand how it works and why it works that way. You know, something just seems off to me, or not quite right about having a process that like you just don't understand. You know, you just press the magic button and something happens, and you don't know what happens, but you like it and it's cool. I mean, I guess to some degree, like when I'm doing 3D stuff, there's a bit of that. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I know that it works. I think the more you can understand it, the more you can understand how to leverage it, and that's important. Okay, enough dad lectures. Let's get to the painting. So I'm trying to block in some light areas, keep it somewhat interesting. I'm not 100% committed to my global light, though. I mean, it definitely is looking like it's coming in something like this, right? I like the idea of having these long cast shadows that maybe pick up on another form. So that might be something that I play with a little bit here. Alright, I'm going to do a new layer, and I kind of like how this brush is feeling, so I'm going to just going to save it. Texture brush. No, I don't want to write modified. I want to actually explain what the difference is. It's a size taper. Okay, now I want to use a brush that has more possibilities as a like a greeble kind of brush. I think that's from a set that I picked up. You know, I recall building brushes a while back, and then I had that crash, and I lost those brushes. And we could rebuild those. I don't want to take a ton of time doing that, but we'll see if we can get something roughed up here that might work for us. I like that. Let's straighten it out. Alright, that'll work. So, now let's see about getting some little technical fiddly bits in here. And the thing I'm aiming for is just having repetition of parallel lines. I think that'll get us started on that impression of you know, that these are structures. These are things that have been constructed to serve a purpose. You know, constructed by human or some kind of intelligent life. Gotta give that caveat for the non-human intelligent life out there that might have constructed these things. Okay. This is where any of my relatives tuning in will be like, okay, yep, confirmed, he's crazy. I suppose it should have been figured out by now. Alright. Trying to get that lined up with the other one. Maybe we'll go a little smaller. It's kind of neat to maybe have them as like windows or something in here. Let's see. You know, one thing I really enjoyed doing, maybe we'll do it here, was just introducing all these kind of like kind of swirly lines to be able to follow. So I'm just going to start getting some blocked in here, and then we'll bring these in into perspective. Though first we'll probably do a what do you call that? Liquify. Let's see. I like the idea of these leading lines that kind of converge. They help draw the eye in the scene, you know. So right now I'm just setting the building blocks for that. I think I did this a little bit in the live stream painting where I did did like a planet. There was like a ship, a couple ships flying in, you know, above the atmosphere. I wanted to have these swirly lines, though I didn't. I don't think I really ended up going on this theme too hard on that one. So there's some pressure, there's a size pressure on this, so I thought that might be an interesting way to break this up, so it's not just the same thing over and over. But I could be wrong. We might get knee deep into this and wish we did have the same thing over and over. Some of that repetition. Don't want to hedge my bets, but I also I just want to be honest. This might not work. Alright, so anyway, we've got this base. We'll go ahead and duplicate that. I'm going to go to I guess we'll do the perspective first, and then we'll do the liquify. It might be worth it to do the other way around, but I want to try this. Alright. So I'm just holding control on these corners, bringing it in. I guess that would be command on the Mac. Open those up. I'll tighten up that background a little more. Okay, something like that. And then once this comes in, we'll go to Well, I guess that is already done. Now we'll do the Liquify here. I'm going to take a drink of my wonderful chai. I mentioned this last week. This makes me very happy. All right. Show backdrop. Here we go. Zoom in here. Come on. Guess I need to press H to get to pan around. I was trying to pan with space, but no luck. All right, so let's see. We got show backdrop opacity. Let's increase that so we can see what we're doing here. The backdrop settings are preventing the preview from showing image changes. Oh my goodness. Why? Photoshop. What do you gotta do? You gotta give us features that we can't use. Doesn't make any sense. I would like a black background, please, so that I can see what I'm doing. You know what? We'll just do this. We'll invert it, and then we'll... I'm sure there's a way to do this, but I ain't got time to search all this stuff. Alright, so we've inverted it. And we're just going to play with this, varying this line thickness. Trying to get these to have a flow to them. Zoom in a little bit. Maybe should have done the warp first and then the perspective later. We can try that if we feel like it. But hopefully what this is going to do is it's going to show some of these lines coming in and then terminating, so that would give the illusion that there's like hills overlapping, you know. So like right here where this line cuts off this other line right here, that would imply that there are two different planes, right? So we want to play with that and exploit that illusion. I'm going to go ahead and I think there's is this the reconstruct tool? Yeah, reconstruct. We'll kind of rebuild this and see what mess we've made here. Okay, then we'll come back. Maybe smooth this out a little bit here. Actually, I'll just reconstruct it. That's probably good enough. Alright, so that will go Control I to invert it. Actually kind of like it being darker. We could do, wow, what is that function? Is it like divide or something? One of these, there we go, exclusion, where it'll like flip it. That might be a little too extreme, but yeah, that's silly. Let's do, we can do normal here. And maybe lower the opacity so that it's not so... Well, actually, we wouldn't really be seeing this in the shadows unless it's a plane, you know, that's getting illuminated. So actually, I'm going to put this up here, and we'll do it normal, and we'll invert it so that it is a shadow layer. Though on the buildings here, I guess we have to make a selection and change those. So let's see. That's our little detail layer. Here's our buildings. So let's do this. Let's separate our buildings from our ground plane, so then we can play with this to our heart's content. Alright, so that's a building, and you're a building, and you get to be a building. You get to be a building. Lucky. I guess that's a building, and I guess you get to be a building. Alright, all this stuff here. You're a building. Whether you like it or not. That'll be background. Building. I think I considered this like a little structure there. And then we get these little like rod thingies going on here that I got a little ahead of myself throwing all these in, but whatever. Alright, so take that. We'll do both layers, and I'll just do Control-Shift-C, and then I'm going to make a mask for that, and we'll do Control-V. Invert that mask, duplicate it, bring our background back in. So okay, we've masked off all of these things, and then we're going to bring them back in as if nothing happened. We can hide those masks till we get this lined up. Right. Just using the nudge tool. Good. Everybody happy? Good. Okay. And then we turn our masks back on. Now we take our black swirly layer. We can either just put it below this, or we can pin it to those layers. I guess I'll just leave it there, just like that. And everybody's happy. I guess we'll name this buildings. Swirls. Do we even need that? I guess we do. Okay. This is a detail layer, I think. And ground. That concludes naming your layers with Eric Elwell, a lesson in naming your layers. All right, so this one I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do the Liquify first, and then we'll bring it into perspective, and we'll see if we get anything more interesting that way. Okay, all right. It's funny using the Liquify tool in 2021 as if it's like this is not novel. This has been around for a very long time. But hey, if it works, use it. All right, so I think the trick with this is to get this nice flow where like it's interesting and it's varied, but your eye can still follow it, you know, which would mean that it would need to be somewhat simplified. And so we're going to try to balance that. I don't think these little swigglies over here helped too much in that regard. You know, where it got out. I was looking to break that up, but perhaps a little too much. We'll see how that works out. That might actually make a pretty interesting texture. Okay, and then this will be interesting. That could be like a little cave. Almost looks like a wave or something. Okay. Hey, just looking at the chat. I see Adonis there. Welcome. Thanks for... Man, you are the faithful faithful viewer. We're gonna have to set up your the follow-up. I was thinking about that today, and I was thinking, why don't we have some kind of objective? You know, like some kind of like particular style or artwork that you want to show and discuss. I think that might ground the discussion a little bit so that it's more helpful for you. But yeah, we should get that. We should get that scheduled. You can hit me up on Instagram or something, and we'll set a time. And be thinking about that. You know, your objectives. Like, what do you want to? What would be the most meaningful thing to be working on and discussing at this stage? You know, you don't have to think 10 steps ahead. Just what do we need to work on now? I seem to remember you were working on before last we talked, you were working on characters and I think clothing reference. So anyway, yeah, we'll get that going. Let's see. This is getting away from me a little bit here, so I might need to heal this area up. Oh, so I should mention I'm gonna hop in the composition class with Marshall Vandriff and do the observer, whatever it's called, eavesdropper, observer, I don't know, thing. I'm really interested in what he has to say on this topic and how he approaches it. You know, composition is something that I've never felt like I've really approached that in a way that makes sense up front. It's like I kind of end up there, you know. It's like and this may be a consequence of doing so much digital work early on, you know, because you can change things as you go, and so it just hasn't been as important to like have that all sorted out before you get started. And of course it is important, like it's super important, because that's ultimately the image, the target that you're going for, you know, that you're going to end up with. And so not knowing where you're headed, it's going to make it difficult to end up there, right? So that's an area that, like, I would like to see some growth for myself, and I'm interested in hearing some insights and picking up some practice, discipline, technique and methods, ways to think about it. So yeah, that's a class that he's starting this Saturday. And if you haven't heard of that, he's one of the guys on the Draftsman podcast. And that would be martialart.com if you're interested in that course as well. I'm excited. I mean, I have a sense that it'll be a more intense version of an academic kind of class, but it seems to be more of like a workout. Like you actually do a bunch of exercises and stuff rather than. Well, I don't know. Well, I guess I'll reserve my my thoughts on it until I actually have something concrete to go off of. But I think these things are pretty interesting. I think it's interesting to find continued learning as a working artist. Like, just got to keep growing, So, anyway, I figured I would mention that, plug that, because I do really enjoy the content that they put out, and so I'm interested to get involved on this one. So, all right, I've been noodling with this for like way too long, so I'm going to make a few minor adjustments here, and then we'll bring it in. All right, so just hit OK. And grab a sip of my chai. Okay, so we get all these swigglies. I'm going to duplicate that. And I'll hide the other one here. In fact, I'm going to invert this before I do the perspective so I can see a little bit better what's going on here. Again, control click, bring it in. I could set this up to perspective, but this is it just gives you a little more direct control over it. Do I want to rotate this before I set that perspective? Might be kind of interesting to just to flip it, to kind of separate those expectations of where this was headed and see if we can get a different result. Again. All right, something like that. Bring the other one back in. So we got the positive and negative. Okay. All right, then we'll come back onto this ground plane. Paint in something here. it's time to switch the brush. As fun as this one has been, maybe time to say goodbye. Okay, so this was a dome test. What was this? Oh yeah, I was doing a little dome things earlier. It might be kind of fun to throw some in here. Alright, here's our fill color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to group these two together. And we're going to take these swirls. And we'll just use that as the mask there. Actually kind of liked what was going on there. I might just play with this. Let's see, our buildings. Do we need to bring this mask? Yeah, something like that, so it's not interfering with that. I'm thinking this would be like a Mars kind of landscape. Red planet. Let's go color burn with that. Yeah, I guess we'll do color dodge with a low fill. Buildings, I guess we can do the same thing. Though actually the buildings, this would probably be okay for blocking, but I may want to just use that that light layer there. Let's do another one of these. We'll add a mask to it. We'll do a gradient so that we can delineate this foreground, background, and if we want to get, maybe we can do another one for like a fog layer up there, sky color or something. Just playing at this point. All right, this one, I'll fill in that background again. We're gonna adjust this to something like that, maybe. Then we will bring in our mask here. Actually, I'm just going to unpin that mask. Come on. And we'll slide this up. Somewhere in there. Alright. So we're just playing a little bit with these transitions in the scene here. This one, debating whether I want this foreground to really darken up like that. That would be like, I don't know, I guess kind of typical. But I do feel like having a kind of like an orange-red mass, you know, really just kind of simplify all this down, like all this, these swirls and stuff. I think will simplify those a bit. That's, where is that? This one here? All right, so these are the foreground swirls. Naming your layers, class number 2. All right, swirl base. Nope. Spelling will be the next one. And this was swirl liquify. Okay, so this one, I'm going to duplicate that and go to my smudge brush, and we'll start working this in here. Of course I saved this because it's going to be kind of destructive. So I think as it comes into the foreground, I want to introduce more texture and have these things kind of break up into somewhat recognizable shapes. So they're not just these abstract swirls, but we'll put a little shadow layer on these as well, so that they have some form and texture to them. But first I want to get it blocked in such that they kind of lose prominence. Okay, so what I want here is this area down at the bottom to just be like a mass, like just a big plane. And so I think I need to flatten some of this out a bit here. And I'm tempted to just to jump in with like a paint over and like break this layer stack here, but I feel like that might be a little premature. So what I'm going to do actually is take a little screenshot, and I'm going to scale that down, and I'm just going to play with that thumbnail composition. Alright, so I'll just take the whole thing. Control-Shift-C. I'm going to do a new layer. Just looking at the chat, Thomas asks, ref or not ref for this one? Looks cool. No ref on this one. This is just kind of experimenting with this method. Started with just black and white to get the silhouette of these of the light areas here blocked in, and actually nuked the ground plane that I had, and I might reintroduce that. I kind of liked I liked elements of it, but I also liked this kind of switch from light to dark with the ground and the buildings. So yeah, just playing with that method, seeing where it takes us. Reference would definitely make sense, wouldn't it? All right, let's do. I'm going to lock this layer, and then I'm going to grab this color here, and we'll go to a this Nasty Square Standard is a pretty good brush for blocking in these little thumbnail studies. Alright, so I had mentioned that I was tempted to just jump into painting, and so in order to save us some time and actually be a little more studious in the way that I approach this, I'm going to do this thumbnail here. So we'll play with ideas just on the big shapes, rather than getting too fussy and trying to control the layer stack and all that sort of thing. I think this just makes sense. Start to figure out where we're going with all this. Alright, so we got this little city up here. You know, the idea being like this is maybe some kind of colony or something. And the way that the light is hitting it, it's as if it's right on the horizon, and it's not hitting the lower part here, so we're getting half lit. So we actually need to kind of sort that out so that anything below that point isn't getting lit. We're just getting the very, very tops of these shapes. Now I think what this needs also is maybe more of a some kind of a superstructure, so that it has something easier to follow. The eye has something to be drawn to. Though, I don't know. Don't want it to be too, you know, on the nose concept art. Like, oh, there's a massive shape in the background there. There's some giant temple or something, you know. But hey, if it works. But at least with a thumbnail, we can test it. We can see if it's getting us any closer to where we want to be, or if we need to ditch it. do need some more chai though. Wonderful. All right, maybe I have this fade off a little bit here in the background, where the if the sun light source is hitting this building here, or hitting this structure, and if this kind of to me appears to be like up on a mound. Okay, so we're gonna do like this. These long shadows here behind it, and maybe build up to that. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about the distance here, so that at this distance we're going to be lowering the contrast, lowering the effect of the shadow. So it's not quite as dark back there. Maybe we'll do some larger stone structures here. And it might be interesting to imply, you know, like a road or something. And again, you know, I don't want to be like too, it's like, oh, I'll just use this little visual cue that gets overused perhaps. But I think there's actually like story there. You know, if you show like this, for example, this is a more developed city. You know, this is like a you know, we started with like this tiny little colony, and now it's like a city, you know. And so you might have some roads leading up to it. Maybe there's something on the outskirts here that would be like, you know, they got to mine something maybe. And so now you're dealing with more more of a story about what life is like here, rather than just like, here's a neat little idea, you know. And I think we relate to that much better. Okay, I'm getting perhaps too many roads here. I do like the idea of like this little rock structure here on the left, having maybe this implication that you have to go through that, you know, to end up into this in the city over here. And maybe, actually it'd be kind of cool, put just this little flat shape here, and then if I zoom in, I think you'll see this actually does a fair amount, just this little bit here, does a fair amount to push all that back and make it feel like perhaps there's another, you know, valley you have to go through. Let's get all these shadows back here lightened up, and then that should help sell that effect. And we darken this ridge here, and maybe bring this up a little bit there. Let's see, maybe some more of this red in here. and delineate this edge. The illusion of space can be a really interesting, thing to tackle. We're just really dealing primarily with value to push things back, but there are more options here. If you think of a color or a hue as a signifier, like I've worded it before as like you ascribe meaning to it. Like anything with this hue is a certain distance away, or anything with this hue is, facing a certain direction. Then you can use that, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. This value right here, that. Trying to show that as like this little, I want to call it like a lake bed, but like just this flat zone back here. And then we start picking up, so let me throw this up there, that color. And then we start picking up this as the background shadow color right there. And this is the background light color, and then the highest light color, and then this here, this is that mid-ground. It's got some black in there, which might be a little excessive. Just popping back over to the chat, you said, can you talk about your first gig? Usually those are fun to hear if you're not busy. First gig as in the first, yeah. I mean, I guess I would think I interned at Garage Games. That was like the first real anything that had a company behind it, but before that, I was doing some freelance stuff, very minor work that came out of like the mod community. So I could talk about those, or some of the first freelance stuff after Garage Games. That's when it kind of became, I guess, more real. But like, yeah, I guess like the very early stuff was like indie, like guys that wanted to do their own little indie project and needed texture work. And some of those guys were just one guy I remember was like, he was a programmer, a developer, and just had his own little side project. He made this little kit with like a horse, which was like super cool back in the day, because those were pretty technically difficult, and there weren't very many. There really weren't many games at all that had horses. I can think of like Zelda or whatever. But anyway, so a lot of the indie guys were going after things that like were interesting to them, but like for either technical reasons or like marketing type stuff that it just wasn't something you'd see very much. And also back then, indie was just not that cool. It was like, oh, those are the guys that aren't, the perception, I think, was that they weren't serious. But I think that has definitely changed in terms of the way that we see indie. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of the jobs were that kind of thing. And that was like me being a teenager at home, trying to figure out how to get something started. And it makes me think, actually, we talk about like pricing yourself and like not taking, not working for credit, or for exposure and all that. And I totally agree with that. But I do wonder, like, the kind of scale of when you're starting out, especially, like, is that something that really is beneficial, or is it in the long term harmful to you to get in the habit of working? So I remember basically getting paid minimum wage on those first jobs, and one of them too, just like, I kept track of my time, and we said what the rate was going to be, and you get to the end of it, and it's like, well, you took like 10 times as long as you should have because you don't know what you're doing. Which in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, that's totally true, and there is a negotiation between the artist and the client. Just because something's worth something doesn't mean that they can afford that. But those are conversations that you ideally should be having up front. But anyway, yeah, looking back on it, it does make you think, like, yeah, is there a threshold where it's actually more valuable for you in the long term, in terms of your mentality and your resilience and your ability to negotiate and that sort of thing, to just set a hard line and say, okay, I'm not gonna work under certain circumstances or whatever. But anyway, those were all very very early jobs for me, and I think that that's a good thing, actually. Like, when I think back on like, getting your start, it's good to have someone who's willing to like take a little bit of a risk on you, because they know that you're a developing artist. But yeah, I think you wanted to hear a little bit more about the story itself. So yeah, I did that horse. I did like a whole bunch of different texture variants for that. Just different types of horses, and then I also remember doing like an undead version, just because that seemed cool to me at the time. And that, actually, I think that was that one was good, but I think that mentality of like, oh, this seems cool, so I'm just going to do it. I think hope I've matured to some degree, where you actually have a little conversation about those things before you just jump right into it and say, all right, here it is, and like, why is it undead? But anyway, trying to think what else. I actually just caught up with someone that I had worked with very early on. I had completely forgot about the project, and it was like these fantasy characters. It was like a starter kit, that you see on one of the like asset stores, and I think, pretty sure that was on Garage Games asset store. They were a indie developer. They made tools for indie developers. They made the Torque game engine, which is the engine that was used in Tribes too. All very, very old stuff. But anyway, yeah, one of the first ones was a asset pack for that, which was like it was like a troll and like a big rock golem, and there's something else I don't remember. And actually, yeah, that's it's interesting going down memory lane because that's how I got started in into digital painting, was through textures. My brother and I did these mods for Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. And a lot of that just involved the art, because you could just kind of swap things out super easy. And we got into modeling a little bit, and then I think I found the most mileage out of textures, because you could take something that was pre-existing and just transform it into something else. And when I went to Garage Games, that's kind of what I got the internship on. We did the art test. I say we because I did this art test, and then when I got there for the internship, they had taken 2 artists, because one guy did really well on the 3D side, and I did not. I mean, I did the 3D work, but it wasn't very clean at all. And I did a little better on the texture side, and so they said, okay, well, I guess we'll take both these guys and maybe come up with one complete artist between the two of them. Yeah, that was a good time. But I think through being there, I remember doing textures for them like the first week or so, and it was just clear that like my fundamentals were lacking. They were in need of some education, because that was, for me, that was straight out of high school. And so I went like literally right back to drawing, back to the drawing board. But we'll say a step before that, back to figure out how to draw so we can get to the drawing board. And so the art director there, he said, hey, just take a ream of paper and like a Bic pen or a Sharpie, and just start with these like graphic kind of icon shapes, and that was actually the first thing that I was making like little icons and user interface stuff. I say first. That was the first thing that I actually that they stuck me on. I was started on textures, and then they said, okay, why don't you do this user interface stuff? So that's the one that I actually finished. And anyway, yeah, so he had me do these things, and he said, like, just do this like every night, take an hour, and just draw for an hour, and then throw those papers in a tote or something. Forget about it, like, don't worry about how they're coming out necessarily. Okay, so anyway, I'm waxing long on this story, but that's how I got started in painting and drawing, and I'm really grateful that they like both recognized the need for that and were willing to like redirect me rather than just give up on me. I mean, in retrospect, I'm like, that's there really is no reason why someone must invest in you, and so I'm grateful that they did. But anyway, it was kind of a long road from there, getting caught up on painting and kind of just the fundamentals. And even then, I feel like there are gaps, having done it that way, instead of doing art school or something like that. And I was absolutely dead set on not doing art school. And I don't know that I would say I regret that, but it's definitely something where I've walked back on and have done it. I took art classes and so forth. I'm going to catch up on the chat real quick. So let's see. Thomas says, "Art horses are the hardest thing to do in games to this day." It's true. Horses are, they're, quadrupeds and everything. Anything that has this like natural motion and beauty and some complexity that we're also used to. Sometimes it's hard to like consider why is it the way that it is and what would go into that. And that little tiny things give you that uncanny valley. I'm sure all kinds of creatures are difficult. It's you can approach like fantastic creatures with some grounding in real animal anatomy, but they're so much easier because there's nothing incorrect about an alien. I mean, it's like it looks more natural if you follow principles that you see in nature. But if you're actually trying to get like, the way a rabbit hops or a bird flies or a horse runs or whatever, it's like, then as soon as something's a little bit off, you'll definitely catch it, And there's all kinds of like little weird things about that, And this is more animation, and I'm not really in that world, but a lot of weird things like eye tracking and that sort of thing, like just the way that we look around and that sort of thing. It's like if you do it wrong, it looks really wrong, and so anyway, I digress. Catching up a little bit more on the chat here. I think it's good experience. It is just usually people who hire for free are usually not good people. That is absolutely true. And not getting paid is not the main problem in my experience. As far as that goes, there are to this day very deceptive people who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal. I mean, literally steal your artwork. And some that will do that without your involvement. Just take something that you've posted online and, it's your mistake for posting it, or whatever their rationale is. And then there are some who will do that to your face, who will contact you and say, "Hey, I really want you to work on this thing, and I think you'd be great," or "I like this artwork that you've already done, and I'll credit you, and we'll use it as a background in our game," or like stuff like that. That like it's just really, it's icky. I can say from one perspective, I can see if you don't know what you're doing, you're not an artist, and you're working on a game, and you're, I don't know, like young, and you just don't understand how it all works, then it would seem natural to like just look around and like source stuff and then like hodgepodge it together and then ask for permission later. But that's obviously that's not on a professional level, and there are those that are a little bit more professional than that, or rather who do understand what they're doing and are still willing to do that. I got an email. This was an interesting. It's kind of interesting to me to like try to dissect some of these things and try to figure out like, well, how are they doing this so that I can understand it, and for one, not get caught in it, and to let other people know about it. So one was I had someone contact me on ArtStation asking about a project that they were doing and it seemed very, it seemed legitimate. You know, like you kind of understand that people are real people, so they just sound like you know, hey, I'm, you know, interested in your work, and you know, we've got a project that I'd like to see if you're a good fit for, or, you know, what's your rate, you know, that sort of thing. And if the more, in my opinion, the more professional it's the more direct they are. You know, you wouldn't get like this long paragraph explaining the project, and usually you don't, and or any kind of irrelevant information about the history and the team and all this kind of stuff. It's usually pretty direct, but also like not super rude or trying to get something from you right away. It's just information seeking. So anyway, so I got an email like that. It seemed legitimate, and the person asked for my availability and my rate, and I told this person, you know, when my schedule would free up and what my rate was. And then I didn't hear anything back, which that happens too. But anyway, it was probably like 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an email that was, it said it was from Sony Entertainment, but you could see in the address line it wasn't from Sony. It was like, you know, some like Sony at garbledwhatever.com or .net or, you know, whatever. It was clearly not from them. And then it explained, it detailed this project and how they thought I'd be a great fit. And then all of the information was the stuff that I had told this other person a couple weeks earlier. It was like, you know, this is the rate, and we're going to start on this date, and, you know, we need someone to fit this role. And that was the other thing I think they asked, kind of like whether I'd be comfortable with certain roles or whatever it was. So anyway, that seemed very fishy to me, that like you just so happen to have this job that's opening, or that's starting, you know, as soon as I'm open, and it pays exactly my rate, and you know, whatever. It was just like, it was weird. So I just deleted it. But it seemed to me that was I didn't want to follow through to figure out, like, well, at what point do they screw you over? You know, like, where does that happen? But it was clear that it wasn't legitimate. But anyway, I just figured I'd throw that out there. That's something that happened, and people will do stuff like that. Okay, I'm talking a lot here, but I'll get caught up on the chat, and then we'll get back to the painting. So Thomas says, so you do 3D for work or no? No, I do 3D stuff. Well, I guess it depends what you consider work. For freelance and contract stuff, I almost never do 3D. I will sometimes do just little block-ins for painting. So primarily what I'm doing in my professional work is illustration and concept art. I do 3D work for my personal IP, which is Fantastic Tanks. And so these are little 3D printed tanks. And those I've built in ZBrush, some in ZBrush, some I did in Gravity Sketch. And of course you have to finish it off in an actual modeling package like Blender or ZBrush. Gravity Sketch is a VR program. And so that's a really different kind of use for 3D. It's not like games. Games are more technical, where you've got to optimize and think about animation and you know, whatever your rendering engine can handle and all that kind of stuff, where you're building it to go into an engine. Whereas for 3D printing, it's like, well, you just have to get it error-free enough to get a model in hand, you know. And so I recognize that those are completely different requirements for that. It's been a long time since I've put any kind of a 3D model like into a game engine. So no, that's not really a part of my professional contract work. But speaking of fantastic tanks, I did a bunch of tanks this weekend. Got a new model coming out, and also some decal sets that are on the verge of completion. And those really put the finishing touches on the models, and it really helps to get the scale too. You know, these things are tiny. They're like 4 to 4.5 centimeters tall, which is like just like barely under 2 inches, right? And printing at that scale is I think it's super cool. Like, there's something about the cuteness of the style and everything, that when you bring it into that size, it really translates. It translates well, and adding the decals really just solidifies. Like, you know, if you can get a really nice crisp, like even just like a really thin like panel line, or like small lettering like numbers and stuff, it makes it feel like, oh man, this is so tiny, you know, like it's something that's supposed to be big, ends up being small, and then it really sells it. So anyway, those are coming along, and I'm hoping to be able to get some updates together and put that out to the public. But the first, there's 3 tanks that are done: the puff tank, the barn tank, and Brian. Brian is a depressed office worker tank, and those are all available on fantastictanks.com. So you could, you know, those are ready to go today if you wanted to get one. And then the next one coming out, I'll save the explaining what it is, you know, for the announcement. But that one I just finished the first like fully painted decals, all that kind of stuff. We're calling it the Artist Signature series, so those are ones that I kind of deck out. But the normal ones you get are primed with like a zenithal top light. So that's basically like you prime it black. If for anyone who's not familiar, you prime it black, and then you prime a second layer from the top down with white, so that it simulates like just sunlight on it. And you know, for a model at that scale, it really helps out when you're painting it, to have that kind of a little bit of light baked into it. It just makes it look nice. So anyway, that's like the base model, and then you can also get the Artist Signature series, which are hand painted and detailed out and everything. Okay, I'm going to zoom out on this. I like what's going on with the clouds here. I'm going to do a new layer and put some notes in here. So these guys, these clouds are kind of like leading lines coming into the city. This here, I'm wondering if we can get a little bit of an S curve, like if the road comes here, you know, so these kind of start to lead into the city, but then we get a little road that comes, and though that's getting awfully close to this edge there, so I want to pay attention to that. And then let's see, could this be maybe flattened out there? I do like the idea of these being like storms, you know, off on the edges there, like these big cyclones or whatever. And then the city itself, maybe we could come up with a more interesting silhouette for that. Let's see, let's try flattening these out and just see what that looks like. Actually, kind of like, leaving in some clouds there or whatever, but let's finish the job, and then we'll then we'll decide whether we'll bring clouds in or not. I mean, we have to. It's kind of it's the pride and joy of painting landscapes, is using clouds to push it a little further. One of the things that I really wanted with this from the get-go, of course we can abandon it if we need to, but was to show the shadows, or have the shadows kind of melt into the background, where it's not any darker than the sky behind it. And that was working well enough with the kind of origin of being like a night scene. But now that we've brightened everything up, we brought in this kind of analogous warm palette. Let's see if we can still make that work. So I think we need to lighten up some of these other values here to get us like in that ballpark. This thumbnail's big enough. We might not even need to translate it into the whole thing. I mean, we could if we wanted it to be large enough for print, but just to make an object, or just to make a concept, it's I think this is sufficient size. I do try to work large enough for printing to be an option. Kind of feel like at this stage, why not with the ability and the power of the computing. It's not like I'm sacrificing much performance to do a larger image, except for when I'm streaming. When I stream it, it can bog up on a few operations, like the blend if, on the layers. So I just glanced over at the chat. Thomas, you said you're graduating. You graduate next year. What are you thinking? Where are you at? make some of these forms a little bit smaller because they're you lose that scale when everything is chunky, fat. You gotta have some little bits that are just tiny. I don't know, I've thrown in like a window there or something. I don't know if we'd actually want to see them at this distance, or whether we'd want to imply them some other way. That there can get cleaned up. You need 1 to 2. You said, I think I need to grind 1 or 2 years more to get into concept realistically. I think it depends. Well, I mean, obviously I haven't seen your works, to really be a judge specifically of that. But I think as far as the industry goes, I think there's kind of 2 things to consider, or 2 ways to look at it at least. That you're probably seeing a lot of work on ArtStation and so forth that's like the kind of work that you want to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only type of work available. Like that's the only thing that companies want, right? In fact, the stuff that comes to the top and that is really like nice to look at isn't what most of the job is. Like it's we want everything to be super awesome, like these really epic images and stuff, but like a lot of times something just needs to be described, like here's the brief, this is the idea, we just need you to like sort out that idea as a design, and so that's like one thing to consider, is that like, well, I guess it's kind of 2 things wrapped up in one. That like, what is actually needed may not be what you think it is, and then what that kind of quality bar, whatever you want to call it, is may be deceptive as well, just because what really grabs online is the stuff that really grabs. It's like it's stuff that's really cool looking, but rarely is a concept artist going to show all the stuff that they had to do that isn't cool, or is, I don't know. The other side of that, or another consideration, and this, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I'm reluctant to say this is kind of why I paused earlier, is that I'm not entirely sure about this, but I have a hunch that concept art is going to change. I mean, it already kind of is changing, but that it's going to I think we're kind of like at its peak, if not like already falling back off, in terms of its particular use. So I'm going to be a little bit, I'm going to probably be all over the place with this, because this isn't something that I've given a ton of thought. This is something that just kind of like today. I was kind of musing over it. Excuse me. But that is the usefulness of concept art, like to one, like I was saying, describe something. Like if you were doing like you might be concepting crates, like we got to make the cube look cool, right? So, and we got to make it look in style. Or doorways or specific like individual assets, for characters and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's kind of a different specialty, but there's a certain amount of like just description. You're just like you're helping make the decision visually, like what are the accessories going to be, where are they going to be placed, what's the kind of the design of the clothing and all that kind of stuff. So that's just like description, and part of that's like the design side, and then the other end of that is for the modeling team who are actually going to have to model that stuff. So if and again, this could be, there's kind of two ends of the spectrum. One is where like you describe everything, you're very detailed in your drawing, or you're like super loose and like you try to get the overall feel and make it like feel cool, and that those serve different purposes. Like one is like to inspire someone and get their creative juices going. That's like the kind of more abstract, like this feels cool kind of thing. Whereas I would kind of put this in that category if this were like an environment. I'm just trying to describe like the overall feel. But for someone to actually come in and model this stuff, there might be a little bit here that gives some information about like the form language and stuff, but it's at such a high level that it's like I'm not showing someone how to model these rocks. I'm just showing that we've got this kind of flat but sort of flowing plane, and then it comes up to these peaks, and the peaks have like a sharp different form language, and that form language would be like harder angles, sharper edges, that kind of thing. But that's that's just such a like top view place to start from, and it's not like super descriptive of how the cracks form and how every single little rock is formed, and is there some kind of moss growing on it, or is there this texture of these little divots in it, and that sort of thing. That's like a different function. Anyway, I'm perhaps getting a little bit lost here, but the thing that I was thinking about is, well, at what point are some of those necessities of concept art no longer valuable or no longer necessary? Like the inspiration bit, kind of the stuff that I'm doing right now. Like, at what point is this only necessary if you need to discover something new or bring something into a very specific niche style? Because otherwise, there's so much content out there that can inspire a team, or inspire a 3D artist who, on their own, could develop, all the specifics of what needs to be done to finish that design. Now, on the other side of it, the descriptive side, I think we are getting like more of a bank of visual stimulus, I guess, and visual information too. Just like not everything can be found by just Googling it, but a lot of things can be. And so even that, I'm a little unsure of its necessity. So, and I want to be clear when I'm saying this. I don't find any of these things really concerning. I don't find it like, oh, no, you know, there won't be a place for us or or whatever. I don't think of it either as like, you know, like the whole AI idea of like, well, soon artificial intelligence will be making art for us and stuff. And it's like, well, the nature of art being what it is, being us communicating ideas and kind of musing over things and communicating that in a visual language, that's not really going to change because it's still a conversation from like person to person. You know, like you are expressing your ideas. And so, yeah, you can could certainly have like an artificial intelligence artist. You know, you could have an artificial intelligence that pumps out stuff that inspires people and communicates ideas. But that doesn't mean that you're not also going to want to listen to what other people think and what other people are working on. And I suspect that artificial intelligence would also, you know, kind of fall into. It would have kind of its guiding lines or its parameters that would kind of dictate what kind of things we see from it. And from what I've seen so far, it's like it just draws from existing work and from history and tries to figure out, you know, kind of the commonalities between those things, which in and of itself is beneficial for us, you know, because that's, you know, it's like having a instructor or something, or someone who is looking for the same things, you know, the commonalities throughout history and, you know, art and, you know, oh, okay. So I don't want to get off on artificial intelligence, but the point being that like all of this stuff is kind of shifting, and to me, I think the biggest thing is it's the market for like companies that need that specific skill set in their pipeline, not just like want it because it's cool or because it's the industry standard. But I think things can shift such that companies will be making decisions on whether or not that's something we need to emphasize so much, you know. So anyway, that's not. I don't know what I'm saying out of that. Let me get back to the chat to see if I was actually answering a question with that, or if I was just going off on a rant. From Callie, so at least I have options. No. Okay, yeah. So portfolio tips, and also you're saying thinking on stylized work. Mobile games and VizDev has that. Yeah. Well, not to go off on another like random rant, but I would say for stylized, it's kind of funny because in a way we've used the term stylized to describe a particular style. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know what you mean by that because it's so commonly used that way. But I would recommend, in that regard, understanding what makes a style work. You know, every single project has some kind of parameters on like its form language, its color usage. I don't know, I'm spacing out, but basically you're going to have all these different ways of describing things. You know, whether it's, you know, line, is it shape, is it, you know, big rounded or sharp edges, or, you know, gritty and textural, or like flat and smooth, the lighting, all that kind of stuff. So like if you are able to consider what makes a style work, and I mean that like literally, what are the workings of that visual language? You know, you can start by picking up stuff that's already out there. Like certainly there's that hand-drawn Disney animated style. There's the Pixar style. You can pick one of those things and think about it less in terms. And this is my opinion. You know, you can take it or leave it. But I would say approach it less in terms of how do I pull that off, and more in terms of an analysis of what different tools and methods it's using. I mean visual tool, like visual cues and stuff. And then work in that style and see if you can adapt it, see if you can pick up another style after that, you know. And I think that to me is a much more valuable, and maybe I'm talking about something that's very niche, but this is just like the world according to Eric. I think that's really valuable, moving from project to project, to be able to understand what makes this work, what makes it uniquely, like it has its own, you know, kind of character and feel to it, and then being able to manipulate that so that it's not like, well, I'm only marketable so long as there's a project that needs, you know, the World of Warcraft style or whatever, or the Disney Pixar style or whatever. And frankly, those things will change over time. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, consider how you might be able to get a little bit ahead of the curve, because if you're looking at a style and wanting to emulate that, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with like falling in love with a style and being I use this term all the time, a faithful practitioner of the style, if that's what you want to do. But just understand that is something different than you working in that style or making those stylistic choices because you choose to, and not because that's what you kind of based your career on, if that makes sense. And I don't want that to sound like too like I'm not putting that down, you know. I think that it is totally fair to like just love something and say I do this in this style because I just have fallen in love with it, you know. But style, generally speaking, is the choices that you make to communicate, right? It's like if I'm trying to communicate space here with these clouds, like I'm dropping these in, you know, I think it would be kind of cool to vary up this skyline here and have I kind of want the peaks of the clouds to come through and then like fade down to nothing, you know. So I don't know, I just playing with that idea in this painting of just these shapes that emerge where you completely lose this edge, but then you get the edge up here. So anyway, this is a choice on how to communicate that. And so I'm also thinking about distance in this scene. That's kind of what I started saying there, is that I want to make sure that as I'm playing with that concept, visual concept with these clouds, that I'm not breaking the illusion of depth by doing that. And I think maybe bringing this cloud in front of these like little jet trails might be a bad decision. But so if that's like the requirement, or that's the idea, like, okay, so how do I communicate depth in this scene and also get those nice smooth transitions and edge control, that's the word I was looking for, then those are all style choices. Those are all things that they're like answers to the necessity, or to the parameters that I'm putting out there for this. And that, in my opinion, is what style is, right? It's like when you have to solve some kind of a visual problem, what answer do you land on? And then your execution of that is your style. So anyway, I'm not saying that to be to go too far off of that like comment about making stylized work. I'm just saying that it is a choice, and it's a decision that I hope that you choose to make consciously, and not just in favor of finding work. Though I have to be sympathetic to that, like finding work is, of course, important. I just think at some point in your career it becomes less important, and the why you're doing things and your ability to make decisions and to have some say in that, to me, I think becomes more important than the marketability. All that stuff that I was saying about making style, understanding different styles and what contributes to them working. It did kind of come out of the mentality for me early on that I wanted to be marketable. I wanted to be marketable by understanding how to adapt to different project needs. So it comes from the same place, or at least it did for me. It came from the same place as it sounds like, what you're looking for. I'm holding back a sneeze right now. It's probably a mistake. That's a bad thing, isn't it? Holding back sneezes. It's like, I don't know how many brain cells die when you do that. I want to flatten these out a little bit here. And maybe carry this through that cloud there, and then we can erase it here. And here. Okay, sorry for the long rant. Alright, I'm going to catch up on my chat here. mostly want to get into stylized because I do not like doing 3D work, and most of the realistic things use 3D all the time, like Last of Us or something. And it is bad for you to hold back the sneeze. Okay, thank you for the confirmation. Yeah. As far as portfolio stuff, you asked that earlier. You know, I've heard the advice to tailor your portfolio for where you're going. Though I think I have to give the caveat that, like, when you're applying somewhere, my take on it is that you're considering whether or not you're going to be a good fit for that place, and whether that place is a good fit for you. And I know, definitely early on, it just everything gets, there's so much emphasis on getting that first job, you know. And so I recognize that. But I do think that it's still relevant to consider, like, would my work be a contribution to this company? And will I want to keep coming to work in the morning, you know, every day? I mean, if it's a place where you just really don't fit, then that's the whole point of the interview and the whole, you know, portfolio process, is to identify that early on so that neither of you are wasting each other's time. So, that being said, there is a certain amount of, like, your work has to be marketable, but it also has to be, like, genuinely what you make and what you, what the company could expect from you. And so I think you need to balance that. Like, obviously you want to put your best foot forward, put your best work out there, but also make sure that you're doing it, it's the kind of work that you're doing and that you intend to do, and that you are putting most of your time and energy into mastering, right? And it just sounds so basic to say, like, you know, if you want to get landscape jobs, don't show characters. But at the same time, that's quite different from that to that. Yeah, I think you need to be honest about the type of work that you want to do. I'm going to do a, let's see, darker color. We're going to select this guy, this one here, and we're going to shift it over. Ooh. Nope. There we go. I'm trying to find that happy middle ground between the sky color and that, like, little trail there. Yeah. So portfolio, I don't feel like that advice was very complete. Yeah, I think that if you focus on the type of work that you want to end up doing, and I think the most important thing is just do work. You know, and what I mean by that is, it's a lot easier to select from a lot of work that you've done, and then maybe, like, put some finishing touches on it, than it is to, like, have only a handful of works and then you've got to, like, make those ones awesome, right? And I don't mean that you make a huge portfolio with tons of work. I mean, you make a bunch of work and then you're very selective about which ones you show. So that's maybe less about like the portfolio presentation, and that's more about the practice behind the scenes of like, how do you get there? But I just think that there's really no way around that. There's no way around, like, well, how do I make my portfolio look the best? It's like, well, you work on the craft, right? I mean, I know that's like so blunt, but I think it's true. All right, what do I want to do with this? Maybe do a maybe we'll do a color balance on that. My trouble with color balance is that I'm always tempted to go split complementary. Like I'm doing it right now. See? I'm like, ooh, shadows would look nice if they were a little bluish, and then everything else should be red. And I do like the look of that, but I kind of set out on this one thinking it would be cool to do a analogous. So let us be faithful to that first. Okay, now let's do curves. A what? So this should be kind of interesting. When you are saturating your colors, the highest saturation is in the midtones. And so I think the stuff in the distance I can bring down a little bit. Of course, yellow does have a natural like higher value in its when it's saturated. I don't think I want this like super bright, rich color there, so I'll bring that back down. But I want to see if we can bring our mids up to be able to deepen the saturation of those. Of course, the color is getting all wonky on this. Maybe we put this below our color balance. I might just do a hue saturation and then adjust it this way. So we'll leave we'll leave the master there. Grab these yellows. I want those less saturated, a little brighter, and we can, oh, that's fine. Okay, and then this is probably actually coming out gray, but they look kind of greenish to me. Let's see if we can get those identified. Yeah, I'm talking about that band right there. Okay, and then adjust that manually. Okay, and then we'll go to our reds. Yeah, I was just looking at the chat here. Thomas says, I sometimes set the curves to luminosity mode so that it does not affect saturation. Pretty useful too. Yeah, that's correct. That's a good way to approach it, I think. Probably should have done that. So coming back to that original idea of just having this kind of red mass here, that's kind of what I'm looking to reconstruct. We might bring these yellows back in. And the white of that background back there, I think that could be adjusted as well. So actually, let me pause in here. Let me get this somewhat to my satisfaction. And then I'll do a new layer here. I'll select this and we'll shift it over to yellow. And we'll do darker color. And we might need to actually go just a little bit darker than that. Maybe more saturated. And with this, we can actually kind of just draw, it'll paint right through like this. That would allow us to blend it up, as it gets higher in the scene. Now I think I'm going to try to maintain that deep saturation there. Alright, let's see how much we want that. How much influence we want to give that. I think we'll leave it at 100 and we'll just paint in manually with the transition that we want. I think I might have preferred it before, but I'm going to try like another blend mode here. And we could do blend if, but it's going to, it'll crash us, but it might be worth it. No, I'll stick with darker color. And I'll intensify this just a little bit. We'll see what we can do with it. He's gone quiet. That's not good. I don't know. It actually might be a good thing. All right, let me zoom out on that. I think maybe I like this being this red mass down here, but I think bringing these clouds up a little bit might give some. Actually, that's an overlay. I don't like that. Normal. How do I want to handle this? Color dodge. That'll work. I'll go a little more yellow with that. Alright, so then I want these to fade. So I'm going to smudge that in here. Let me zoom out so I get a better impression of what I'm doing to the image. Do I want to remove that? Yeah, I think so. I want these to just kind of peek, the very tops of this cloud to kind of peek into the light, and then as it bends this way, bends in. Of course, now that we zoom in on it, kind of want to give that just a little bit more structure. flat. Gotta get rid of that. It's crazy, you know, like how much time is being spent just on getting this cloud to get the right, have the right feel. I might have talked about doing like a road thing here. Maybe we'll do that. Now, granted, I'm drawing underneath of some adjustment layer, so it's going to have an effect on that. And instead of really doing like a true S-curve, like I don't want to just hello, you know, like that. We'll see if we can just kind of get little implications of it and get it to pick up. You know, you'll see it start here, and then you kind of pick up little pieces over here. And I think all of this in there needs to be much, much thinner because it's like, well, because it's a background element. I suppose technically it could be a midground, but should not be particularly thick shape there. And maybe we bring this little rock formation up there so that we lose that edge. Or break up that line rather, just for a little bit. Yeah, let me see. I might just use the eraser tool and cut into that. Do we want to show that curve, you know, the point where it curves in, or not? Question of the moment. And I should know this already, but yeah, I probably shouldn't do that. Whether or not to take it off the, you know, out of the frame or not. Just working in a few lines here to kind of break up these these swirling patterns just a little bit. I'm still following the form, and I don't know to what degree I'll keep this or not. This layer, I mean. And then again, in keeping with the conversation earlier about, assigning meaning to your colors and hues, like if we want this to communicate that it is a separate region, we have to make sure that those delineations are held up. That is, that we're using this in here, using this value and color to differentiate between the distance in the scene between the background and then this rock formation here. Okay. It's funny. So that's what we started with. And then we ended up here. And this was supposed to be a thumbnail, but I kind of like it as it is. Alright, this was the adjustment that I made. Somewhere in there is fine. I might do another color balance here. And then it's probably a good place to wrap it up. Ridiculously red. Sure, why not? We're about to find out. Still, I'm always tempted by that complementary split. Just makes everything pop. Hue or color or normal. Let me zoom out, get a look at this. I'm gonna go with color on this one. What is this guy even thinking? Making a ridiculously saturated scene. Okay, let's see. What do we have here? I actually liked what these were doing earlier on. One of these was actually, I don't really like either of those. Come to think of it. Yeah, let's dial it back because this is crazy. And then, where were those? Those guys right there. There we go. That's a little more subdued than what I was playing with before. And are these in the base texture here? Let's find out. These little, yeah, those are. Okay, so we'll just go to the smudge brush and smudge those over. In fact, I find this banding a little bit annoying, so we'll see if we can clean some of that up. Yeah, I guess we'll stop there before we get ahead of ourselves. It's a bit purplish down here, and I am tempted, well, whatever, I'm just doing it, I guess, to dial in that region right there so that it's not so intense. But in typical fashion, when I say I'm going to do something so that it's not X, Y, or Z, then I end up making it exactly that. More X, Y, and Z. Okay. And just for kicks, we have to do this every time. Do a little overlay. Actually, having done that, I kind of like, well, okay. Had this idea, whatever, let's do it. of having this fade back up. So there's just a little slice of light. So like if there's a cloud layer, you know, towards our sun, then this fades up. And we reintroduce our shadow color up there. But let's do that as darker color. That way we don't have to worry too much about getting it exact. I think we'll use this right there. And that intermediary color there too. Color. Why am I saying color? Forgetting how to talk. This happens late at night. And I guess we need to bring those little jet trails back in. All right. Better or worse? Honestly, couldn't tell you. But we're going to stick with it. All right, so I'm going to stop here. It was a good conversation tonight. Thanks for the prompts in the chat and the questions that you had. I recognize and accept full responsibility for going off on wild tangents and mad rants. But I hope that there was something in there that that helped you to maybe look at things from a refreshing perspective or some other way to kind of sort these things out. Yeah, as always, I think if we're painting along together and you have a project that you're working on, that's the best thing, for these streams. I do these every Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find more of my stuff on Instagram. It's Eric Elwell Art. Or the Fantastic Tanks that I talked about. That's fantastictanks.com or Fantastic Tanks on Instagram. And for my personal stuff, I need to post more work. I don't know. I've just been very behind the curve, I guess, on Instagram. I haven't really posted much on there, and so I need to get some of this stuff from the live streams up on that. But yeah, so if you're interested in seeing more work, you can find me on ArtStation, Instagram, and the Fantastic Tank stuff. So thank you for joining in tonight. This was a fun one, and again, appreciate the lively conversation. So with that, thank you for coming, and thank you for leaving. Good night.